Iced coffee is the perfect summer treat and always feels special and refreshing. I love finding the right balance for my morning drink, and I enjoy iced coffee well into fall and winter. Brewing your own iced coffee at home is an easy and cheap way to enjoy this treat all summer long. Contains major spoilers for The Mandalorian Season 2. After nearly a year since its Season 1 finale landed on Disney+, the hit Star Wars series The Mandalorian finally made its triumphant return to streaming on October 30, 2020. Following the impressive and incredibly popular inaugural season, the second season is already shaping up to be just as big, if not bigger, than its predecessor. Casting rumors and story speculation have taken over the internet for the better part of the past few months, but now is finally the time for viewers to kick back, relax, and see whether or not their predictions come true as the next 8 chapters roll out. Simultaneously, another fun incentive for tuning into The Mandalorian is the plethora of Easter eggs the show supplies. I spoke with baristas and some serious iced coffee enthusiasts about how to brew the perfect cup day after day. The likes of Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, who are Star Wars fans as much as they are creators, spearhead The Mandalorian, and they don't shy away from deep cuts into the franchise's lore. From filtered water to fresh coffee beans, the details matter when it comes to this drink. Here are just a few of the ways you may be messing up your iced coffee. It's too weak. This is probably the most common iced coffee mistake. You need a lot of ice to cool off your drink, but that tends to water it down. It looks to carve out its own niche in the established universe, but there are still plenty of small details, references, and cameos to keep die-hard fans skimming through episodes with a fine-toothed comb. The best tip is to brew extra strong coffee to offset the ice. Dunkin' Donuts shared their secrets for the perfect iced coffee and recommended always double brewing your coffee, so that once you add the ice, you'll have the perfect flavor. The melting ice weakens the coffee's taste, which is why iced coffee is brewed stronger to begin with. Rob Steven, manager, product development for Dunkin' Donuts, Inc., shared in a press release. The first season excelled in this regard, bringing together aspects of all 3 Skywalker saga trilogies in a subtle manner while still creating an intriguing and totally original narrative. In a similar fashion to the initial batch of Mandalorian episodes, Season 2 appears equally as plentiful in the Easter egg department. Here are the secrets lurking in the background that you probably missed. What became of Jabba's palace patrons? Right off the bat, the season premiere of The Mandalorian Season 2, entitled Chapter 9, The Marshal, kicks off Din Djarin's Pedro Pascal journey to find the remaining Mandalorians hidden across the galaxy. He hopes that they can help him relocate the child, aka Baby Yoda, to wherever he came from and, by extension, lead him to his family as well. The restaurant recommended using 4 teaspoons of ground coffee for every cup of iced coffee you plan to make. Once you've brewed your drink, keep it in a glass jar in the refrigerator. You're using regular ice cubes. One way to avoid watering your coffee down with ice cubes is to use coffee for ice, too. Food blogger Elise Bauer swears by coffee ice cubes. Besides your iced coffee, you can also use these coffee ice cubes in smoothies, cocktails, or blitz them in a blender to make a quick coffee granita to serve for dessert, she shared in a blog post. The next time you have leftover coffee, freeze it into cubes instead of pouring it down the drain. Even Starbucks is going to start offering coffee ice cubes, but it'll cost you. Starting in some cafes this summer, you'll be able to enjoy your iced coffee with coffee ice cubes for 80 cents more. Your sugar isn't dissolved. I love a nice black iced coffee, but sometimes I'm in the mood for something a bit sweeter. However, when the coffee is too cold, oftentimes nut milk or sugar won't dissolve, and I end up with a grainy, powdery drink. However, this won't be a one-and-done task, as the Mandalorian sects are notoriously difficult to locate, meaning the titular bounty hunter has to ask around to locate his people. The first stop for Mondo, the nickname for Din Djarin, is to meet up with an Abyssinian, a callback to a Cantina alien from 1977's A New Hope, named Gor Koresh on a seedy, unnamed planet. No thank you. For the perfectly blended iced coffee, food blogger and cookbook author Rhee recommends making your own simple syrup. There, the two converse during some type of combat sport involving 2 Gamorreans squaring off with vibro axes inside something resembling a boxing ring. A batch should last you for a few weeks, unless you like to douse your coffee in sugary goodness.
An appearance from these guys isn't too unexpected, since Favreau shared on his Twitter page last year a picture of a statue of one of them, revealing the Gamorreans' cameo during Season 2. These pig-faced aliens made their Star Wars debut in 1983's Return of the Jedi, posing as guards for the gangster Jabba the Hutt. No judgment here, Rhee wrote in a blog post. Alongside them were a handful of weequay, which just so happens to be the same race as Mos Pelgo's resident bartender. Then you can add a splash of milk or half and half, although I highly recommend the latter. You could also sweeten your coffee while it's still hot to ensure your sweetener dissolves, then cool it off. You're using the wrong water when making iced coffee. I tend to focus on the type of coffee I'm using, rather than the water. However, because coffee is mostly made up of water, it makes sense that the right filtered water will make a difference in the taste. Certified barista and head of quality control at Café Virtuoso, Savannah Phillips, schooled me on the importance of water when it comes to your favorite drink. Most commonly, people don't use properly filtered water, and since water is 97 to 98.5% of coffee, using great water is a must, she told me. You're letting it sit too long even if you double brew your coffee. If you let it sit on the counter all morning while the ice melts, it's going to taste watered down. You'll also probably never make it again, because it took too long. With the underworld kingpin long gone by the time of The Mandalorian, it appears his former palace rogues are doing their best to make ends meet. R5-D4 is still kicking after concluding his less-than-cordial meeting with Koresh. Mondo and his foundling make their way to Tatooine to look for the supposed Mandalorian wandering the planet's sandy plains. One strategy to try is using a cocktail shaker. The neighbor may raise her eyebrows when she sees you shaking up a drink at 7 in the morning, but it's the fastest way to get your iced coffee cold. Simply pour in your freshly brewed hot coffee and ice cubes, then shake it up. Your coffee beans are too old. Iced coffee is such a refreshing treat in the summer, so it's a shame to take a sip of an overly bitter drink. Of course, they can't get a good look around the planet from the Razor Crest, so they enlist the hanger of Peli Motto, Amy Sedaris, who first appeared in The Mandalorian's inaugural season alongside her crew of pit droids. To get the best bang for your buck when it comes to coffee, use the fresh stuff. Choose a great freshly brewed coffee that's well balanced, and has flavor components that you want to exemplify, Phillips told me. Store in an airtight container, and try to consume within the first 2 weeks of buying. But they're not the only droids running amok in her mechanic area, as a familiar face popped up to help Mondo navigate Tatooine's perilous terrain. Motto stored the map of Tatooine inside an R5 astromech unit that fans of A New Hope likely recognized immediately. In said film, Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, goes off to purchase from the Jawas a new droid for the family moisture farm, and the red and white R5-D4 was his first choice. Sadly, the little guy didn't get to go off and have galaxy-wide adventures with the future Jedi, thanks to a bad motivator, so that spot went to the fan-favorite R2-D2. It's good to see that Motto could fix him up, even if he's a bit sluggish for her liking. Callbacks to a variety of Tatooine locations. The vast majority of The Mandalorian Season 2's first episode takes place on Tatooine, which is one of the most important locations in the Star Wars universe. After that, the coffee will become stale. Koresh's lead sends Mondo to the off-the-grid town of Mos Pelgo, but bookworms would recognize it by another name, Freetown. Always freshly grind with a burr grinder as well. It's too boring. Iced coffee is an easy, refreshing treat, but don't subject you and your taste buds to boring coffee all summer long. There are plenty of ways to jazz it up, so get creative. Adding almond or cashew milk gives your coffee a sweet, nutty flavor. The creamy nut milk will also cover up any remaining bitterness. Chuck Wendig's 2015 novel Aftermath introduced the village, describing it as a dirty, sparsely populated settlement that wasn't for the faint of heart. The Mandalorian's Chapter 9, The Marshal, however, marks the first appearance of the run-down community in any visual medium, adapting it to near perfection. Additionally, during her discussion with The Mandalorian about Mos Pelgo, Peli Motto name drops some other recognizable Tatooine locales as well. If you're a coconut fan, try coconut milk for a smooth finish. Spice up your coffee with a cinnamon stick or a dash of nutmeg.
First and foremost, she mentions Mos Eisley, a wretched hive of scum and villainy that housed Chalmun's Cantina and took on a pivotal role in both A New Hope and The Mandalorian Season 1. Mos Espa, the home of Watto's junkyard and the birthplace of Anakin Skywalker, Jake Lloyd, Hayden Christensen, received a nod too, thus rounding out Tatooine's few major settlements. Boba Fett returns. Head of education at Toby's estate in Brooklyn. Ali Caron told Bon Appetit that adding lavender, basil, and mint to your coffee is refreshing in the summers. Kinda upon arriving at the largely unremarkable Mos Pelgo, Mondo enters the local cantina to speak with anyone who can provide him with information on the town's supposed Mandalorian resident. Or combine your iced coffee with another refreshing summer drink. For Mondo, the result was pretty disappointing. He didn't find one of his people, but rather Cobb Vanth, who was simply wearing the armor with no ties to the creed. It doesn't take a deep knowledge of Star Wars to recognize the gear as Boba Fett's, although, if you only watch the movies and TV shows, you'll have to do some digging to learn about Cobb Vanth. Vanth, as portrayed by Deadwood star Timothy Olyphant, made his debut in the Star Wars universe in the aforementioned Aftermath novel. The book details his journey pretty vaguely, running over the broad strokes of him receiving the armor from the Jawas and subsequently saving Freetown from marauders and Tusken Raiders, thus earning the moniker, the Marshal, hence why the Season 2 premiere bears that name in its title. The Mandalorian certainly picks up the slack, putting Vanth front and center with a series of flashbacks to supply a bit more detail than a few book pages could pull off. The Krayt Dragon makes a terrifying entrance, committed as ever to his beliefs. Mondo refuses to allow Vanth to keep the Mandalorian armor since it technically doesn't belong to him. Mix cold brew concentrate with equal parts coconut water. It tastes like chocolate milk, barista at New York City's Café Grumpy Solomon Olmsted told Bon Appetit. You're paying for extra water, of course making your iced coffee at home will be easier on your wallet in the long run. Since both of them are rational men, they come to an agreement that will service both parties. However, there are just those days when it's not going to happen. Mondo can have every last piece of armor so long as he helps Vanth take down, once and for all, the carnivorous beast known as the Krayt Dragon that's ravaged Mos Pelgo for years. They might not realize what they're dealing with, but longtime Star Wars fans instantly recognized the danger the two were in. Krayt Dragons are as old as Star Wars itself, first appearing in the background of A New Hope. After C-3PO Anthony Daniels and R2-D2 crash land in the middle of the Dune Sea, a Krayt Dragon skeleton sits in the sand way off in the distance. Despite holding a constant, menacing presence across all forms of media, Krayt Dragons, live ones, anyway, are an incredibly rare sight throughout the canon. Some days you'll find yourself ordering your iced coffee at a coffee shop, and that's okay. Just make sure to get your order right. Always order your iced coffee with light ice. Most of the time, the story relegates them to a fleeting mention or a set piece used to fill in space, even though they're massive beasts with highly valuable pearls in their bellies. Not only will this keep your coffee from becoming watered down right away, but with less ice in that cup, there will be more room for delicious coffee. You haven't tried the Vietnamese way. I had never heard of Vietnamese iced coffee before writing this article, but now it's all I can think about. However, if the Krayt Dragon's arrival on The Mandalorian Season 2 proved anything, it's that these long-tenured yet infrequently seen creatures are no joke. Now this is podracing. After making their agreement, Cobb Vanth and the Mandalorian make their way across the Dune Sea in pursuit of the Krayt Dragon. Such a long stretch of sand and scorching heat is impossible to trek on foot, so the two found alternative transportation to reach their destination. It's a decadent, creamy treat perfect for the heat. Mondo rides off on the same speeder bike he borrowed from Pelimato, but Vanth pulls up in something quite out of the ordinary. His makeshift vehicle sported two large flaps on the front, covering a turbine set below them, with a seating area attached to the rear. This sweet drink combines 1 part strong coffee and 1 part sweet condensed milk. For the real thing, you'll need a Vietnamese filter called a fin. This hodgepodge of components calls back to the Phantom Menace's pod racers, sporting a similar look to young Anakin's model. Filter the coffee into your mug using the fin, then spoon in the condensed milk.
There's no way to confirm if it came from his specifically, but the pieces undeniably came from someone's pod racer. Life on Tatooine isn't easy for really anyone, whether you're a bounty hunter seeking your next job, or a moisture farmer trying to break even. Stir in the ice, and whip up a creamy summer treat for your next brunch. This will beat a frozen coffeehouse drink any day. You're skipping breakfast. It doesn't matter how perfect your iced coffee is. It's not a glamorous place to live, nor is it the most up to date with the rest of the galaxy, being that it's deep in the Outer Rim territories. If you just opt for that in the morning and skip breakfast, you're going to end up feeling shaky and starving by mid-morning. If you never feel hungry in the morning, try beefing up your iced coffee with fruits and nutrients to make a smoothie on the run. This coffee breakfast smoothie from Natalie's Food and Health looks absolutely dreamy and gives you a full breakfast with oats and chia seeds. You're not cold brewing. You may have thought cold brew was just iced coffee with a different name, but it's not. Turns out cold brew has a completely different brewing process and smoother finish. It may become your new summer drink. Cold brew has become become very popular over the last few years, certified barista Savannah Phillips told me. Therefore, the planet's occupants need to make do with what they have, using whatever they can scrounge up to stay alive. It's simply coarsely ground coffee that is steeped in water at room temperature or in cold water for 12 to 24 hours. In the case of Cobb Vanth, that survival tactic presents itself through his speeder made out of recycled pod racer parts. Boba Fett returns, for real this time with the Krayt Dragon defeated. Cobb Vanth keeps his word and returns the Mandalorian armor set to Din Djarin. The episode concludes with the two parting ways as allies, and the Beskar-clad bounty hunter rides off into the sunset with the child at his side. Per usual, this is not to be confused with iced coffee, as that is brewed hot coffee or espresso and poured over ice to rapidly chill. I recently tried cold brew for the first time and was hooked right away. The episode's story looked complete there, but there was one last surprise left for the fans. By far the biggest Easter egg of The Mandalorian's Season 2 debut came in the form of the most fearsome bounty hunter to ever live, the legendary Boba Fett, played by Temuera Morrison. From the moment of The Mandalorian's conception, audiences have clamored for Fett to make his big comeback on the show at some capacity. After all, he and the series' main character are incredibly visually similar and they're in the same profession, so a crossover felt like a given. The previous season didn't do much to satiate this subset of fans, but thankfully for them, Season 2 is going all in. It tastes very similar to iced coffee, but there's no bitter aftertaste. For the past number of months, news outlets reported on Morrison's casting and lit the social media world ablaze, building serious anticipation for the show going forward. Now, at long last, Jango Fett's clone son is once again making his way to the forefront of the Star Wars universe, and by the looks of things, he's in no mood to make friends. Enter Dr. Mandible. After returning from the successful Krayt Dragon hunt, the Mandalorian returns to Mos Eisley in Chapter 10, The Passenger, to meet with Peli Motto. He reports back and lets her know that the supposed Mandalorian frequenting Mos Pelgo was just a man in Mandalorian armor, but she reassures him that she can put him in contact with someone who can lead him to his people. The main reason why so many people enjoy cold brew is that this method produces a very smooth and easy to drink coffee, has very low acidity, and nicely showcases the coffees typically chosen for this brewing method, which tend to have chocolatey, malty, and caramel-like flavor characteristics. Shared Phillips. First, she introduces him to a brand new character named Dr. Try It this summer. For the perfect cold brew, just like with iced coffee, you have to use the right techniques and ingredients to get the perfect cold brew. Just as in iced coffee, most commonly, for cold brew, people don't use good filtered water, but also grind the coffee way too fine. Phillips told me, Mandible, a giant, bug-like creature whose brief screen time carries with it a couple of meanings. For one, drive, since the steep time is relatively lengthy, a super coarse grind is required. Think French press. Pick a great coffee that's well balanced, and has flavor components that you want to exemplify. Mandible appears to be a member of the Killick species first introduced in the now Star Wars Legends Dark Nest trilogy of books by Troy Denning, a member of the Killick species that may have been drive.
Mandible himself briefly popped up in the background of a previous episode of The Mandalorian, Season 1, Episode 5, where they were seen sitting at the cantina bar. It's also worth noting that filmmaker Peyton Reed, best known for films such as The Breakup and, of course, Ant-Man, directed Chapter 10, The Passenger. Thus, the inclusion of this ant-inspired character seems a not-so-subtle nod to the director's Marvel Cinematic Universe contributions. Anyone for some sabacc? When Mondo first gets back to Mos Eisley after a long, strenuous walk across the desert, his first stop is at the local cantina, the very same one from A New Hope, where he finds Motto in the middle of a high-stakes card game against Dr. Mandible. The scene doesn't last long, and their game isn't the focus by any means, but the cards in Motto's hands point to one of the Star Wars universe's favorite pastimes, a good old-fashioned game of sabacc. Sabacc is a staple of Star Wars, appearing in everything from books, TV shows, video games, and, obviously, a few of the movies. It's mentioned now and again throughout the Skywalker saga, even popping up in the background of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, but its most notable appearance came in 2018's Solo, a Star Wars story. In the film, a young Lando Calrissian Donald Glover cheats a young Han Solo Alden Ehrenreich out of a game, but the Corellian smuggler later gets his future ally back by using his techniques against him to steal a win, walking away with the Millennium Falcon. Barbecuing in a galaxy far, far away just before departing for Trask, Mondo and the child wait inside Peli Motto's hangar for their passenger to arrive. As a token of their appreciation, they leave her with a portion of the Krayt Dragon meat they secured in the previous episode, which she cooks up rather peculiarly. A WED-15 Treadwell droid holds up the cut of meat before the flames of a stationary podracer engine to roast it, referring back to a real-life Star Wars eatery located at Disney's Galaxy's Edge theme park. The restaurant in question is Ronto Roasters, a neat little place with a menu including something for everyone. While Ronto Roasters doesn't have any crate dragon steaks for sale, one of its more decorative elements draws a neat parallel to this Mandalorian scene. At the heart of the diner, you can watch droids cook food beneath a podracer engine in the same fashion as Motto's droid. Even though it's all for show at the amusement park, it's nice to see this method of food preparation make its way into Star Wars canon proper. Trapper Wolf, standing by Mondo and the child's journey with their passenger, the Frog Lady, voiced by the legendary D. Bradley Baker, and her container of eggs becomes a bit complicated since they can't utilize hyperspace travel for the sake of her unborn children. Instead, they have to make the journey to the planet Trask at sublight, meaning that anyone looking for the titular Mandalorian, for better or worse, will have a much easier time finding him. That includes the New Republic's X-Wing patrols, who press the bounty hunter relentlessly for information about his ship and his shady dealings. One pilot in particular likely stood out to seasoned Star Wars fans from the moment he arrived on-screen. The mastermind behind both Star Wars, The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, and an occasional Mandalorian director Dave Filoni makes a brief appearance in Chapter 10, The Passenger, in a reprisal of his Mandalorian Season 1 role, Trapper Wolf. The character made his franchise debut in the episode, Chapter 6, The Prisoner, in which he, alongside fellow directors Deborah Chow and Rick Famuyiwa, destroys Ranzar Malk's, Mark Boone Jr., space hangar following the escape of New Republic prisoner Chin, Ismael Cruz Cordova, the eight-legged terror of the Krykna following their crash landing in the Razor Crest. The Mandalorian, the child, and the Frog Lady are left to survive in the bitter cold of an unnamed ice planet. Fed up with Mondo's sluggishness in repairing the ship, the Frog Lady wanders off into the snowy labyrinth and finds a hot spring for herself and her eggs to unwind for a bit. Concerned for their safety, Mondo comes to let her know she needs to return to the ship, and his hunch was right. In a scene akin to something from Ridley Scott's Alien, the child unintentionally awakens a den of spider-like creatures known as the Krykna. The Krykna have a long, storied history in the Star Wars universe, first realized in legendary concept artist Ralph McQuarrie's The Empire Strikes Back sketches and initially known as the knobby white spiders of Dagobah. While they never appeared in that film, the Krykna eventually made their spine-tingling entrance during Star Wars Rebels' second season, in the episode, The Mystery of Chopper Base. They later appeared in a handful of other installments of the series, but their introduction on The Mandalorian is their first in live action. And, for those with arachnophobia, hopefully their last. Quarren and Mon Calamari take center stage the third episode of The Mandalorian's second season. Entitled, Chapter 11, The Heiress, brought the titular bounty hunter and his little green counterpart to the estuary moon of Trask, completing their mission to deliver the Frog Lady and her children back to her husband. After the pair makes a bumpy landing on one of the moon's sea-bound ports, the episode offers a closer look at its many residents, the bulk of whom belong to the Mon Calamari and Quarren species. At this point, both of these aquatic alien races are incredibly prevalent in Star Wars media, dating back to the original trilogy. Both the Quarren and the Mon Calamari joined the universe in Return of the Jedi, although they appeared in drastically different places. The aptly named, squid heads, were prominent background entities during the Jabba's palace scenes, while the film introduced the Mon Calamari as key members of the rebellion during the Battle of Endor, the most famous among them being the legendary Admiral Gail Akbar, Eric Bowersfeld, who remained a part of the faction until he died in 2017's Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Additionally, a Season 4 arc of Star Wars, The Clone Wars, put their conflict on their home world of Mon Cala front and center, and 2016's Rogue One, a Star Wars story, also bolstered the Mon Calamari's standing in the rebellion's ranks with the introduction of Admiral Raddus, Stephen Stanton, Paul Casey. For the both of them, this actually isn't their first appearance in The Mandalorian. In the opening scene of the series premiere, a Quarren was seen being sliced in half by a door, courtesy of Din Djarin. Grief Karga, Carl Weathers, also offered Mondo a Mon Calamari bounty in a later episode. Bo-Katan to the rescue. After chartering a ship to go find more Mandalorians, Mondo and the child are betrayed by their Quarren sea captain, who attempts to feed the little one to a monstrous Mamacor, drown Mondo, and thieve his valuable Beskar armor. Thankfully for both of them, they're rescued in short order by a group of blue and gray-clad Mandalorians, including franchise newcomers Axe Woves, Simon Cassianides, and Koska Reeves, Mercedes Varnado, better recognized as WWE Sasha Banks, who are led by fan-favorite character Bo-Katan Kryze, portrayed by her longtime voice actress Katie Sackhoff for the first time in live action. Bo-Katan arrived in the Star Wars universe during the 4th season of The Clone Wars as Death Watch leader Pre Vizslaw's Jon Favreau, right-hand woman. With Pre Vizslaw's later demise at the hands of Maul, Sam Witwer, Bo-Katan and a group of Mandalorians split off from the faction and formed the Mandalore Resistance, playing an integral role in the Siege of Mandalore during the Clone Wars Season 7. Following the fall of the Galactic Empire, Bo-Katan's exploits were shrouded in relative mystery, as her story drops off after her brief appearance in Rebels. However, it appears that The Mandalorian will rectify that, finally giving audiences the answers they desire about her whereabouts and motives in a post-Imperial world. The quest for the Darksaber in The Mandalorian Season 1 finale, Moff Gideon Giancarlo Esposito unveiled his weapon of choice, the ancient Mandalorian Darksaber, to the world by cutting through the wreckage of his downed TIE fighter to escape. Since that moment, viewers have wondered how exactly this top-ranking Imperial official wound up with the artifact, especially since there's currently no media hinting at how he retrieved it and who he took it from. Before its re-emergence, however, Bo-Katan was the last person shown wielding it, in Star Wars Rebels after Sabine Wren Tia Sircar handed it over to her. Any specifics detailing how she lost it have yet to come to light, though. Chapter 11, The Heiress, went a long way in solving this mystery through a bit of key dialogue from Bo-Katan that hints to a previously untold Star Wars story. After she and her crew fight their way to the bridge of an Imperial shuttle, Bo-Katan interrogates the head officer played by Deadwood alum Titus Welliver and demands to know Gideon's whereabouts. She doesn't get any information out of him before he takes his own life, but she does allude to some kind of shared history between him and herself surrounding the Darksaber. Hopefully, the show will expand more on how the weapon slipped from her hands into Gideon's at some point after her Rebels cameo. Ahsoka lives. After successfully hijacking the shuttle with Bo-Katan and her allies, Mando departs to continue his mission of delivering the child to its people, but not before asking his fellow Mandalorian where he can find the Jedi she claimed to know.
Grateful for his aid, Bo-Katan tells him to travel to the city of Calodan on the forested planet of Corvus to locate another animated favorite, Ahsoka Tano. The debut of Anakin Skywalker's former Padawan in live action is a long time coming, with speculation over Rosario Dawson's casting as Ahsoka running rampant for months, and the circumstances surrounding her imminent arrival couldn't be more satisfying for die-hard Star Wars fans. Having initially squared off as enemies, Bo-Katan and Ahsoka allied during the Siege of Mandalore, as detailed on the Clone Wars 7th season. Once the Jedi Order disbanded and Order 66 went into full effect, leading Ahsoka to go into hiding, the status of their coalition grew murky, but it seems that they retained some method of contact throughout the Galactic Civil War and in the midst of the Empire's collapse. Also, much like Bo-Katan, Ahsoka's adventures continued through Rebels, where she took up the codename Fulcrum and became a secret rebel operative. Her fate beyond the series finale was a mystery for a long time, but it's likely The Mandalorian's 12th chapter will finally fill in some of the long-standing blanks in her story. Aqualish thieves get what they deserve in the opening moments of Chapter 12. The siege, Mando and the child make way for Navarro so that the Razor Crest can receive some much-needed repairs before the big trip to Corvus. As it turns out, in their time away from the planet since the Season 1 finale, Navarro has undergone some serious changes, going from a sparsely populated hovel under Imperial occupation to a budding, small-scale urban center. Although, the seedier criminal elements that get Navarro its reputation remain festering in the shadows. One such example is the small band of Aqualish thieves that took up residence in the armorer's Emily Swallow former forge. Navarro's Marshal, Cara Dune, Gina Carano, makes quick work of the bandits, ensuring they won't get any further screen time, but it's not much of a loss for them since the Aqualish thieves have appeared all over the place over the years. From the mid-rim planet of Ando, the alien species is a Star Wars mainstay, tracing back to A New Hope, in which one particularly short-tempered Aqualish named Ponda Baba tried, and failed, to pick a fight with Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, in the Mos Eisley Cantina. Additionally, the race features in the background of all three Star Wars prequel films, The Clone Wars, the Star Wars Battlefront 2 video game, and so much more. A galactic geography lesson shortly after arriving on Navarro, Greef Karga calls in a favor from Mando, telling him that he and Cara need his help in taking out an Imperial outpost that threatens the tranquility of their settlement. The bounty hunter agrees, but there's just one problem: he can't take the child with him on this adventure. Instead, Greef and Kara insist he leaves the little one at the newly established school, where he gets the chance to learn about the current geographic makeup of the galaxy. But it's entirely likely the child's mind was solely on his classmates' delicious blue cookies. At any rate, during the lesson, the protocol droid instructor name drops some relevant locations in the Star Wars universe. The droid rattles off the core worlds, the deep core, the colonies, the outer, mid, and inner rims, the expansion region, and trade routes like the Corellian Run and the Hydean Way. The most notable detail the droid teacher touches on is that the New Republic capital has shifted from the iconic locale of Coruscant to Chandrila, the birthplace of Mon Mothma and Ben Solo, aka Kylo Ren. Books, video games, and Star Wars Rebels have mentioned this planet before, but this is arguably the most mainstream attention Chandrila has received up to this point. In the same lesson, the droid also points to an important area of the galaxy called the Acades Maelstrom, which hosted one of Solo, a Star Wars story's most intense sequences. This dangerous region houses the Maw Cluster, the home of the Suma Verminoth beast that nearly swallows the Millennium Falcon whole during Han Solo, Alden Ehrenreich, and his crew's perilous attempt to make the famed Kessel Run. They, of course, make it in less than 12 parsecs, so long as you round down. The after effects of hibernation sickness with the child presumably safe at school and the Razor Crest in for a tune-up, Greef, Mondo, and Kara head back to the magistrate's office to talk business. The moment they walk in the door, they're greeted by Mithril, Horatio Sans, who now lives a life of servitude to make up for getting on Karga's bad side. This is the same character Mondo took the bounty on and froze in carbonite in the Mandalorian's premiere episode. Despite having thawed some time ago, Mithril complains of a very familiar side effect that comes with prolonged carbon freezing. Greef makes sure to let Mithril know that he has no qualms about sticking him back on ice should he not follow his directions, to which the blue alien remarks that he'd prefer not to and that he still can't see out of his left eye. This quip refers back to Return of the Jedi, in which Han Solo's Harrison Ford release from carbonite established the existence of hibernation sickness, an ailment that presents itself as temporary blindness depending on the length of one's imprisonment. Thankfully for Mithril, unlike the Corellian smuggler, he had more time to regain his vision in at least one eye before having to handle a blaster. A vintage troop transport, the team wastes little time departing Navarro for the outlying Imperial base, but they experience a brief hiccup when trying to actually get in. Conveniently enough, Mondo's jetpack comes in handy, flying him up to the landing platform and opening the elevator door from the inside. Now on the installation's upper level, Kara, Mondo, and Greef assess their situation and review the plan, while Mithril stands in awe at what will become their one-way ticket off the sabotaged base, a Trexler Marauder. This vehicle has popped up in a few Star Wars projects lately, including Rebels and The Mandalorian's first season, and went by the simple name of the Imperial Troop Transport, or ITT, for short. Despite its recent focus, though, it took over 4 decades to get the vehicle in live action. This particular people mover's roots go back to the toy stores of 1978, where the Imperial Troop Transport arrived as a part of Kenner's Star Wars action figure line. At the time, it hadn't appeared on the big screen and only came to fruition thanks to its appearance in unused concept art from A New Hope. Sure enough, its patience paid off, and the ITT is now the Trexler Marauder and a certified part of the Star Wars canon. The Imperial cloning project resurrects the midi-chlorians, and connects to Palpatine? Surprisingly, the mission to rid Navarro of Imperial presence goes off without a hitch, outside of a brief speeder chase across the lava fields. The crew manages to make a fairly clean getaway, but not before they uncover a disturbing secret about why the Empire is so interested in the child and why they continue to set up shop in the Outer Rim territories away from the prying eyes of the New Republic. By the looks of things, the Imperial remnant is going all in trying to perfect a way to clone a Force-sensitive being. Greef, Kara, Mondo, and Mithril look on in horrified confusion at the Snoke-esque, malformed bodies occupying blue liquid-filled tanks deep in the bowels of the facility. They look over the communication records on the base's computer and find Dr. Pershing Omid of Tahi explaining the Empire's dire need for the child if they're to keep this mysterious program going. He also mentions the child's M count, likely referring to the amount of midi-chlorians in his body that contribute to his proficiency in the Force, meaning that is of some value to their experimentation. Midi-chlorians have remained one of the most controversial parts of the Star Wars universe, and fans haven't heard them discussed in the franchise for quite some time. Of course, you're surely thinking, what does this all mean? If these hints are as obvious as they seem, then the only logical answer is that this fledgling Imperial cloning program connects to the miraculously alive Emperor Palpatine, Ian McDiarmid. The Rise of Skywalker established that he's spent years biding his time on Exegol in rapidly decaying bodies, attempting to find the path to immortality through clones. It's unlikely he went at such an endeavor by himself, meaning the remnant members of his empire were probably hard at work trying to create a new, more powerful form for their leader during the events of The Mandalorian. Considering how strong Yoda and the child species is in the Force, and the length of their natural lifespan, there's no better candidate for a Sith Lord who's trying to rule the galaxy for all time with absolute power. The memory of Alderaan lives on in the closing moments of Chapter 12, The Siege. New Republic pilot Carson Teva Paul Sun-Hung Lee makes a quick stop on Navarro to take down a report of what happened at the Imperial base. While he doesn't come away with much, he does get the chance to speak with Cara about her past in the rebellion and also pitch to her a chance to come back into the fold. She ultimately declines his offer, but not before the two take a moment to recall the tragedy of her home planet, Alderaan. This small dialogue sequence is an overt reference to A New Hope's depiction of the destruction of Alderaan, the adopted home of Princess Leia Organa, Carrie Fisher. In the film, the devious Grand Moff Tarkin, Peter Cushing, threatens Alderaan's destruction via the Death Star's super laser if Leia fails to reveal the location of the rebels' base.
Even though she confesses, the smug Imperial figurehead destroys the planet anyway, striking a huge blow against the rebellion, as it was one of their strongholds in the Galactic Senate. At the same time, the move backfired, since it pushed survivors like Cara Dune to take up arms against their oppressors, never letting go of the memory of this atrocity. Assembling the Dark Troopers at the very end of Chapter 12, The Siege, Moff Gideon speaks with an Imperial officer, who tells him that, the tracking beacon has been installed on the Razor Crest, meaning their plans to keep a careful eye on Mondo and his crew are going exactly the way they want them to. Even better news for the dastardly Gideon. Mondo still has the child in his care. Upon hearing that a source confirmed Mondo's possession of the child, Gideon declares, "And we will be ready." The officer gives a knowing nod and walks away from Gideon, who cracks a villainous smile, then turns around to observe what appears to be a dark trooper, a battle droid that looks like a stormtrooper but with a black exterior instead of white. However, as a sweep of the camera quickly reveals, it's not just one dark trooper that Gideon is eyeing, it's a whole room full of them. In the Star Wars universe, Dark Troopers first popped up in the 1995 first-person shooter game Star Wars: Dark Forces. The game follows ex-stormtrooper-turned-rebel mercenary Kyle Katarn, whose discovery of a Dark Trooper weapon kicks off a journey centered around uncovering the secrets of the Dark Trooper project. Since then, the troopers have made appearances in video games like Star Wars Battlefront, Star Wars Battlefront 2, Star Wars Battlefront, Elite Squadron and Renegade Squadron, Star Wars: The Force Unleashed, and Star Wars: Commander. They've also been mentioned in the young adult novel The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader, and made several appearances in non-canonical games and expansion packs over the years. Whether the Dark Troopers in The Mandalorian will be anything like the ones Kyle Katarn faced off against in Dark Forces remains to be seen. Though it seems evident that whatever Gideon is planning to do with the troopers is rooted in the desire to steal the child from Mondo and capitalize on his Force-sensitive abilities for the advancement of the Empire. Maybe this will connect to the cloning project going on Navarro. 8D8 has fallen on hard times shortly after the impressive live-action debut of fan-favorite Ahsoka Tano. Rosario Dawson, Chapter 13, The Jedi, jumps to Mondo and Grogu, the real name of Baby Yoda, formerly known as the Child, arriving on Corvus to meet with the Togruta Force user about potentially teaching the little one. They promptly land and make their way to a nearby settlement in hopes of meeting Bo-Katan's contact, and are welcomed by barren, grungy streets with sparse inhabitants. One of the few that the two pass by in the town is a Roche Hive 8D series smelter droid, first introduced in the original Star Wars trilogy. The most notable of this run of droid went by the moniker 8D8, who appeared on the big screen for the first and only time in Return of the Jedi. It didn't hold the spotlight for very long, as its biggest claim to fame is being the one responsible for torturing GNK series power droids at Jabba's palace. Over the years, however, this brand of droid has become a frequent background presence across other forms of Star Wars media, ranging from the animated series The Clone Wars to the Galaxy's Edge novels that indirectly explain one's residency at the theme park of the same name. A convoy waiting in the wings. The Mandalorian's main characters barely spend 5 minutes inside the town before the magistrate, Morgan Elsbeth Diana Lee Inosanto, summons them to speak with her. She gets right to the point, offering Mando a pike made out of pure Beskar so long as he can defeat Ahsoka for her. While he doesn't necessarily accept the job formally, he does secure a set of coordinates to find the Jedi from his wannabe employer, which he uses to his advantage, with no intention of actually killing her. He and his foundling set off into the mangled wilderness, but little do they know, something is watching them. High above their heads, resting on a tree branch, sits an owl-like creature known as a convor. Rebels and Clone Wars fans surely recognize the significance of these winged mammals, as they're prevalent throughout Ahsoka's journey in the Star Wars canon and represent the purity of the light side of the Force. Dave Filoni, who wrote and directed Chapter 13, The Jedi, has gone on record saying that convores, the plural of convor, are also observers and protectors, and the one present in The Mandalorian just before Ahsoka arrives to defend herself against Mando fits that description perfectly.
Memories of Anakin's fall to the dark side. Despite their rough first meeting, Mando quickly explains to Ahsoka why he's come to speak with her, introducing her to Grogu. She immediately takes a vested interest in him and communicates with him through the Force, revealing that he trained with the Jedi on Coruscant during the days of the Republic, but someone hid him once the Empire rose to power. The next day, Ahsoka evaluates Grogu's abilities, and even though he proves a mildly capable Force user, Ahsoka refuses to train him, for a reason that is central to the entire Star Wars timeline. She cites Grogu's attachment to Mando as why training is totally out of the question and why he must allow his powers to fade away. As she recalls to the bounty hunter, Ahsoka witnessed firsthand what a bond like that can lead even a fully trained Jedi Knight to do, referring, of course, to the fall of her former master, Anakin Skywalker. The driving force behind his transformation into Darth Vader was his devotion to Padme Amidala and the love he held for her. He refused to let her go and inadvertently sent the galaxy into disarray, disbanding the Republic and eradicating the Jedi in the process. Given how much Anakin meant to Ahsoka, acting as her older brother for years, it's understandable that she'd want to let Grogu lose his Force connection and prevent the creation of another Sith Lord. Old Republic-inspired assassin droids Ahsoka and Mando eventually come to an agreement that benefits them both. If he helps her displace Magistrate Elsbeth and free her settlement, she'll take Grogu under her wing and hone his Force powers. With that in mind, they pack up and make their way to the village, but they don't go in without some kind of game plan in mind, particularly taking into account the kind of security Elsbeth surrounds herself with. According to Mando, she's always flanked by 2 HK-87 assassin droids, which fans of the Star Wars, the Old Republic MMO will surely recognize as bad news. Hunter-killer droids first arrived via the 2003 Star Wars, Knights of the Old Republic video game, and were characterized as highly efficient assassins known and feared for their stealth. Various models took center stage depending on the story, the most notable being Darth Revan's personally constructed HK-47. Others appeared all over Old Republic-era media until it was stricken from the universe back in 2012, following Disney's purchase of the Star Wars IP. However, their brief nod in the 2018 book Star Wars, Smuggler's Guide by Daniel Wallace brought them back into the fold in a rather minute way. Their unsuccessful attempt to stop Mando and Ahsoka also marks their first live-action appearance in the franchise, canon or otherwise. Return of the Tuca. Once the Jedi and the Mandalorian make it back to the village, they get started right away and infiltrate its thick walls, and, in true Star Wars fashion, a massive firefight ensues from there. Severely outnumbered, Ahsoka has no choice but to utilize a stealth approach to take down her enemies. At one point in the fight, she begins traversing the back alleys in an effort to box her opponents in, leading them to carefully sweep the area and apparently frustrating the local Tuca population. This lovable yet dangerous type of feline has become a staple of Star Wars media over the past few years, dating back to their earliest appearances on the Clone Wars. The most well-known subspecies of Tuca is the Lothcat, a frequent face in Rebels and a handful of Dr. Aphra comics, as well as in other various books and shows. Additionally, this isn't their debut on The Mandalorian either, as one variety of Tuca popped up in the Season 1 episode Chapter 4, Sanctuary, with an equally sour attitude as this one. The hunt for Thrawn continues unsurprisingly. Magistrate Morgan Elsbeth can't hold her own for very long against Ahsoka Tano, and ultimately loses their duel. The Jedi knocks the spear from her opponent's hands, holding a lightsaber up to her neck as a form of intimidation, hoping to get the information out of her that that she desires. She demands her foe to reveal the location of Grand Admiral Thrawn. Non-Rebels viewers might be a bit lost here, but for those who spent plenty of time with the Ghost Crew right up until the series finale, this is exactly the question they've waited years to find out the answer to. A holdover from the non-canon Star Wars expanded universe, Grand Admiral Thrawn burst on the Rebels scene as his cold and calculating yet honorable self. He immediately engaged in a bitter rivalry with the likes of Kanan Jarrus, Freddie Prinze Jr., Harrison Dula, Vanessa Marshall, and Ezra Bridger, Taylor Gray, that would turn out to be his undoing. During the liberation of Lothal, Thrawn and Bridger were shot into hyperspace by a group of Purrgil, and haven't appeared in any Star Wars media since.
Ahsoka and Sabine Wren Tia Sircar set out to find them shortly after, but, as evidenced by the Mandalorian's reveal, the search goes on. A trip to Tython at the end of Chapter 13, The Jedi, Ahsoka doesn't necessarily hold up her end of the deal, once again refusing to train Grogu, but she does give Mando a push in the right direction. Just before he and his foundling board the Razor Crest for their next adventure, she advises that they set out for the planet Tython, where the ruins of an ancient Jedi temple reside. There, Grogu can sit on a seeing stone and decide between letting his Force abilities go or continuing his long-dormant training. He might even be able to connect with one of the few Jedi left roaming the stars. Tython is fairly new to the Star Wars universe, but its importance to the overall history of the galaxy is immense. Located in the deep core and shrouded in mystery, Tython is one of the planets considered the birthplace of the Jedi religion. It has yet to appear on the big or small screen, but served as a central plot point in the 40th issue of the Dr. Aphra comics and got a passing mention in the High Republic #1. It's entirely likely that fans will have the chance to learn more about this legendary locale and its backstory as The Mandalorian's second season continues along.